Thank you for joining with us tonight in the 11th session of the Secret of the Circle webinar series. In the last session, previous sessions, we were joined with International Labour Organization, and this is our next session based upon an LGBTQIA plus movement. The agenda for tonight's session is on the topic demystifying HIV/AIDS and its impact on the lives of LGBTQIA plus community and our fellow community. We are glad that you are part of our webinar series. Nauticums Event Management Private Limited is a student-led initiative run by a team of students from various universities in Australia, Canada, India, Philippines, Saudi Arabia, UAE, UK, and USA to facilitate dialogue on some of the most important questions that the third world is faced with right now. The vision behind the Secret of the Circle webinar series is to set up a deliberative space that will enable conversations to occur without a power hierarchy, offering space for different voices to be heard, simulating in the voice of a circle that stands for unity, harmony, and equal consideration of all participants. We believe that the platform will create a free flow of ideas that will enable the youth to ask relevant questions that embark on a solution-seeking journey. Before we start the session, there are a few points to be kept in mind. Please keep your microphone off for the entire duration of the webinar so as to not disrupt the proceedings. You may turn your video on or off as per your convenience. There will be two different parts for the session. First session on the topic, then there will be a question and answer session at the end of the talk, followed by, and then we will be moving on to the word of thanks. Joining with us tonight in this session is Dr. Chiranjeev Bhattacharya. Sir is the National Program Manager of Health and Governance Unit of United Nations Development Program in India. Sir is a renowned international public health professional of United Nations. It is indeed a humble privilege and honor for us to listen and learn from you, sir. And on behalf of the entire Nauticums team and on behalf of the participants, I welcome you, sir, to this session. Without any further delay, we hereby request you to kindly take forward the session. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, thank you for your kind words, Kevin, and for introducing me. Very good evening to all my young friends, and I'm really happy to be joining you this evening, and thanks once again for inviting me. So basically, I have been asked to speak on the topic of demystifying HIV/AIDS and how it is basically impacting the LGBTQI community. So with that in mind, I have prepared a short presentation, but this presentation will be mainly to basically guide our discussion. I will just go through the presentation, and please feel free to in between also if you want to discuss or share your experiences. So it should be a two-way communication. So you can speak in between also, and at the end, of course, we'll have the interaction. So I'll also love to hear from you your experiences and how you see this whole issue. So without further delay, let me go into the presentation. So this presentation will consist of different parts. So I will initially start with the HIV scenario. What is the current scenario at the global level? As many of you know that December being the World AIDS Day, so many of the new current situation data on HIV has also come in recently. So we'll see that also, and especially as you all know that this year 2020 has been unprecedented in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. So a lot of things have changed and are going to impact our future course of action. So we'll side by side we'll deliberate on that also. Also, I think based on my interaction, mail communications with Kevin, I have assumed that most of our viewership will be from the Asia Pacific region. So I had in my presentation, I have tried to then come down to the Asia Pacific level and see what is the HIV scenario in this region, Asia Pacific region, and then further going to specific impact on the LGBTQ community, how it has been impacted by this. It is also a pandemic which is there since last 40 years. So we'll go in that flow of slides. To start with, as I mentioned, we are not in a stage now when we should discuss what is HIV and what is AIDS and how it is caused. I'm sure that all of my young friends, in fact, are more updated from even from me also in some aspects. But we are also, anyone who has doubt on the basics of HIV, when we finish this presentation at the end, you are free to feel free to ask me questions on the basics also, but in the presentation we will not look into that, because now, as we all know, in the early 80s, 1981, 82, at that time the first cases of HIV were detected, and since then it's almost 40 years into the HIV pandemic. However, it continues to be a major public health problem. In terms of what is a public health problem, whenever a disease continue to exist in numbers which are affecting whole populations, then it is known as the public health problem. So till date also HIV continues to be a big public health problem. So we'll see the numbers, and that will tell you that why it continues to be a major public health problem. So secondly, we all know that the United Nations in 2015, after the Millennium Development Goal targets were covered, the next goals were set for 2030, and they are known as the Sustainable Development Goals. So even Sustainable Development Goal 3 focuses on health and well-being, and within Goal 3, target number 3.3 specifically talks about ending AIDS as a public health problem by 2030. So in the whole international scenario, we are driven by this Sustainable Development Goal. So for the AIDS pandemic, it's the goal 3.3 that is leading the way. So in that terms, as of now in 2019, because in 2030 we have the 2019 data, so in 2020, so the 2019 data show that as of now we have 38 million people living with HIV across the world. And if you look at how many people were newly infected, so in 2019 an additional 1.79 million people were newly infected, and 690,000 people died due to AIDS related causes in 2019. So since these big figures continue to exist in millions, that's why HIV continues to be a major public health problem even today after 40 years of its beginning. When we see at the basically, because as you all know that now since last 10 years or 15 years, we have medicines available for treatment of HIV, which basically doesn't cure the disease, but it prolongs the life of the person, and these medicines have turned HIV from a deadly disease to a more chronic disease. So that has been a major development. So in 2019, 68% of the adults and 53% of children living with HIV in the globally, they were on this antiretroviral treatment. But you can see that among adults, almost 30% were still not on treatment, and among children, more than 40%, almost 47% of the children were living with HIV are still not on ART. So even though treatment is available, because of various factors, people still don't have access to treatment. Majority of the pregnant women and the breastfeeding women living with HIV also received ART, which is a very good development. So there is a program which works on prevention of mother to child transmission of HIV. So under that program also ART medicine is given. So that has been a great success, and it has basically ensured the prevention of HIV transmission to newborn to a great extent, and we have reached a stage where now we are thinking of going for elimination of prevention of parent to child transmission. But still we have not reached there, but that is a very encouraging development in terms of ART access to the pregnant women and breastfeeding women. Also at the end of 2019, an estimated 81% of people living with HIV knew their status. Among them, 67% were receiving antiretroviral therapy, and among them 59% have achieved suppression of the HIV virus, which signifies that there is no risk of infecting others. So this is known as the prevention cascade or treatment cascade. Basically, whenever a person is HIV positive, from the program point of view, first he should be tested for HIV to know that he is positive, and once he is positive, he should be put on ART treatment, and his ART treatment should be continued in a proper manner so that there is viral load suppression. That means because of the treatment, his virus levels will reach such a level where it will not be able to transmit the infection from one person to another. So that is the ultimate goal of the program. So as per the UN high level meeting held in 2016, in view of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goal, they have set a target of 90-90-90 for 2020. So what is this 90-90-90? That is basically of all the people who are positive, 90% should know their HIV status. Among those who know their HIV status, 90% should be on treatment, and among those who are on treatment, 90% should have viral load suppression. So it was estimated, or it was calculated from research, that only if we are able to achieve the 90-90-90 by 2020, we will be on track to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Goal target. So as you can see now, and obviously in 2020 the COVID pandemic happened, but even before that we were not on track to achieve the 90-90-90. So you can see the first 90 was, what was achieved was 81%, second 90 what was achieved was 67%, and the third 90 what was achieved was 59%. And to make it worse, now we have the COVID pandemic, which has not only affected HIV/AIDS, but it has virtually affected all the health services, because in the last 1 year the health services were mostly focused on addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. So it has had impact on all the major other public health programs, including HIV/AIDS. So now it has been evaluated, and now the new goal that has been proposed by the United Nations and the development partners is basically the goal of 95-95-95 by 2025. So again, the theory is same. First 95 will be testing, second 95 will be treatment, and third 95 will be viral load suppression. So but then to achieve that, as we have seen in the 2020 targets, that it's not easy. So to achieve the 2025 targets, it will require a renewed focus from all aspects of the program, and we will see and we will discuss how that is possible, and planning especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. So as I've been mentioning, the COVID-19 pandemic has pushed back our efforts of controlling disease. It has pushed back our efforts of eliminating poverty. It has pushed back inequality, and basically the communities which are more vulnerable or more marginalized, they have been pushed back further in terms of development. So with that in mind, it will be a big challenge to achieve the 95-95-95 target by 2025. So this is the current scenario globally on the HIV epidemic. So now, as I mentioned that let us now come down to the Asia Pacific region, where a significant proportion of the HIV epidemic is concentrated. And when you talk of the LGBT community, the LGBT community also in this region is being unique in its own regard. So when you talk about the magnitude of the HIV epidemic in the Asia Pacific region, you can see that 15% of the global burden of HIV is in the Asia Pacific region. So 5.8 million out of the 38 million people living with HIV in 2019 were in the Asia Pacific region. Among them, India, China, Indonesia, they accounts for three quarters of the total population living in the region. So although if you look about the prevalence, that means out of the total population how many people are HIV positive, the prevalence number will be less in countries like India and China, because the denominator, that is the total population, is huge. In fact, these two are the most populous countries in the world. But when you look at the absolute number, the total number of people living in the with HIV in this country, that number itself are very big. So they are basically the majority who are contributing to the 5.8 million living with HIV in the Asia Pacific. Also in the region, there were 300,000 new infection in 2019. So again, you can see that that's a huge number, and 3/4 of this infection were among the key populations and their partners. So when you see in the Asia Pacific region, or to that matter in most of the world, this HIV epidemic is concentrated among certain group of population. So to my friends who are not familiar with the term key populations are populations which are at higher risk of acquiring HIV. For example, female sex worker, people from the LGBT community, like men having sex with men, that is the gay men, or the transgender population, or the injecting drug users. So these are some group of population, because of the high risk behavior they are being exposed to, they have higher risk of getting HIV infection, and in fact they are having more number of infections. So from the program point of view, they have been termed as key population. So that's why you can see that in 2019 also, majority of the new infection, people who were newly infected, were among this key population and their partners. So that, and this is the common trend across the Asia Pacific region. Also in terms of AIDS related death, 160,000 deaths has happened in 2019 from AIDS related causes. What is the scenario of ART? How many people are on ART? Out of the total PLHIV or positive people, 60% of adult and 65% of children are on ART. So ART coverage again is, almost 40% to 35% people are still not having access to the antiretroviral therapy. When you look at the situation of 90-90-90, so it is even lower than the global average. So globally, if you remember my previous slide, out of the total people, 81% of the people were aware about their HIV status. In the Asia Pacific region, 75% of the people are aware of their status. Among them, 80% are on treatment, and among them 91% were virally suppressed. So the positive point is that although the first two 90s were less, but the third 90 was on a higher side. But if you look at out of the total, then it percentage go up. So basically in the Asia Pacific region also, the achievement of the 90-90-90 fast tech targets are off track. When you want to look at certain specific countries in the region, it is seen that in most of the countries, when you look from HIV preventive point of view, there was a lot of focused prevention, especially among unprotected sex and use of condoms, etc., which has led to major reduction in HIV in countries like Cambodia, India, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam since 2010. So if you look at India, almost 27 to 30% new infection has come down since 2010. So similarly in these countries also, the new infection has come down. However, new infection are rising in countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, Philippines, Papua New Guinea, and AIDS-related deaths also continue to grow in Bangladesh, Pakistan, Philippines, Afghanistan, and Indonesia. So this is what I am talking about, the trend. So if you are looking at the trend since 2010 till 2018 or 2019, in these countries the number of new infection, people newly infected or the AIDS-related death is showing a steady increasing trend, which is the reason of worry. Many countries in the region have punitive and stigmatizing laws that prevent key affected population from accessing services as well as reinforcing HIV stigma. So as we will move forward, and we have a few slides to discuss on these laws also. So you will see that especially for the key populations, these laws have a big role in their access to HIV prevention as well as HIV treatment services. So that also need to be addressed. So HIV is such a disease where addressing just provision of preventive services and provision of treatment is not enough. When you will be able to address the socio-economic or cultural and other barriers, then only the access to treatment and prevention will increase. So that's why these different policies and laws that are in place, they also play an important role in the access to prevention and treatment services. Okay, so that was a broad overview on the HIV scenario. Now let us come down to our focus population group of discussion today. So we are now looking at the LGBTIQA plus community in the Asia Pacific. So from HIV perspective, and we are talking about big numbers and public health program point of view. So here mainly the gay population or the MSM from the program perspective, we address them as men having sex with men, and the transgender population. From absolute numbers from this LGBTIQA community, these are the two subpopulation which have the highest numbers. So and also there are intersection between other high risk group, and that we'll see how. So let us first address this MSM group of population. So here the HIV epidemic among this population is found to be growing. Why? In 2018, 30% of all new infection in the region occurred among men who have sex with men. So as we can see that in this region, the new infections are mainly contributed by the key population. So among the key population, it is the MSM population which is having the highest number of new infection in Asia Pacific region. HIV prevalence among men who have sex with men is particularly high in urban areas. So whatever data we have in the program shows that they are high in the urban areas. In Bangkok in Thailand, Yangon in Myanmar, and Yogyakarta in Indonesia, estimated HIV prevalence among men who have sex with men ranges from 20% to 29%. And I should tell you, these 20%, 29% are very high numbers. That means these are scientifically tested numbers, that out of this sample size, this number of people have tested positive. So anything above 5% is a reason of worry. And here we are talking about 20 to 29%. So basically in these places, wherever this data has been collected from these big urban cities and centers, there the HIV epidemic among these people, the MSM population, is really going up. Across the region, it has been found that men who have sex with men are becoming infected with HIV at a young age. So not only the infection is increasing, another reason of worry is that people are getting involved with unprotected sex at an early age, and because of that their number of exposures will increase, and that is again a reason of worry. One study carried out in Bangkok found HIV incidence among those aged 18 to 20 years was more than double the incidence among those men over 30 years. So how we know that? This study in Bangkok showed that incidence among people who are up to 21 years of age, their incidence was double the incidence among men who are over 30 years. So you can see that in less than 20 years of age, the HIV incidence is really happening in this population. And for my friends who are interested to read up these specific studies, I have quoted the source. So the organization AWARD, they have done this detailed situation analysis of the Asia Pacific region. So you can go into their website and you will get the link to these individual studies if you want to read. So now coming to the transgender population. So according to data from 13 Asian and Pacific countries that are reporting to the UNAIDS in 2018, the median HIV prevalence among transgender population is 3.1%. However, lack of data from the region means that HIV prevalence among transgender people is likely to be much more. So the challenge with the transgender community till now is that availability of quality data and reliable data is a challenge. So because of that, sometimes you get very high figures. Suddenly there will be a low figure, and the data points are not consistent across time and place. So that is a problem with the transgender population. But we can say comfortably that the prevalence there is also not less. It will be in and around 5% or more. The problem with the transgender population is the issue of social inclusion, which we are all aware of, and coupled with lack of employment opportunities from them once they are identified as a transgender. The social norms that prevail in the society lead to lack of employment opportunities from them, and that basically what means is that many of them in the region engage in sex work. So one study estimated the proportion of transgender people who sell sex to be 90% in India. That means out of all the transgender studied in that particular study in India, 90% mentioned being involved in sex work. In Malaysia it was 84%, in Indonesia it was 81%. So it's majority of them involved in sex work. So as I was mentioning, the LGBTQ community, whether it is the MSM community or the transgender community, they also have other identities in terms of HIV high risk behavior. For example, being a MSM, they will have the MSM behavior which is a high risk behavior. To add on to that, they also may be working as a sex worker, which will double their risk of infection. Similarly, for the transgender population, as we have seen that majority of them are in the sex work. And for these communities, obviously we know that the big barriers are stigma, discrimination, and the legal barriers, which remains a major obstacle for providing and accessing services for the community, and it's true across the Asian continent. So as we mentioned, that sex worker group is also again closely related to these key LGBT groups. So among sex workers also, when we see that significant progress has been made in reduction of new infection, that means the new infection that are happening from HIV, that has reduced significantly among the female sex workers across the region, and this is because of the saturation coverage of programs through condom promotion and treatment of other sexually transmitted infection, etc. And there have been visible improvement in countries like Cambodia, India, Myanmar, and Thailand. Despite this, the HIV prevalence among the female sex workers is over 5% in several countries, and female sex workers are around 29% more likely to be living with HIV compared to other women of reproductive age in the region. So, in spite of being successes in the program, the prevalence of the new infection has come down, maybe from 10% to 15% some 10 years ago, but it still continue to be above 5%. And when you compare to a normal woman without any high risk behavior in the reproductive age group, the risk of a female sex worker is around 29 times more. So the risk persists. And data on male, again this is an issue, as we are talking about the data issue among transgender sex worker or male sex worker. The problem is that because of the lack of visibility among this population, the data on male and transgender sex worker is very scarce. So it is very difficult till now to find out specific evidences, and then based on that evidences for planning specific strategies. So according to data gathered between 2012 and 2015, national HIV prevalence among male sex workers was higher than 5% in Indonesia, Nepal, and Thailand. So in these countries, there was an attempt to study the HIV prevalence among male sex workers, and there it was found that among them also the prevalence is higher than 5%. But again, as a future action plan to plan any specific intervention among these population, for evidence, generation of quality evidence will be an important action point. Again, I mentioned some of the LGBTQ population being involved in sex work. Similarly, some of the LGBTQ community may be involved in use of injectable drugs. So 1/3 of all people who inject drug live in the Asia and Pacific. So you can see that in Asia Pacific region, both the sexually driven HIV epidemic and the injecting drug driven epidemic is prevalent. And in 2018, 13% of new infection of in the region occurred among people who inject drugs. So after the MSM category, I think it is the second category which contributed to the maximum number of new infections in the region. Although the need for harm reduction is increasingly accepted across the region, a largely punitive policy and legal environment continues to fuel the HIV epidemic among drug users. 11 countries in the region still operate compulsory detention centers. So again, with drug use, there are a lot of legal barriers in terms of handling of drugs, in terms of provision of harm reduction services in some places like closed settings like prisons. So that type of issues, legal barriers are there, which basically acts as a barrier in provision of quality services to harm reduction services to this population. And due to the legal barriers, access to antiretroviral therapy for the people who inject drug is very poor, ranging from 14%, so you can imagine such low number, 14% to 69% in China. So now, since we have been talking in most of the previous slides, now let us look at some of the legal, cultural and socio-economic barriers. So what are they? So, and these barriers are, it's not that whatever I have mentioned, it's a mix of positive and negative. I mean, many of the countries has made very significant efforts to remove these barriers and bring in legislation which will basically help the improvement in access to services. So what I am mentioning is both positive and negative. So in the Philippines in 2018, AIDS Act has been passed to expand human rights for people living with HIV. So to address stigma, discrimination and all issues in different settings like healthcare, education, employment, etc. This act has been passed in Philippines. Similarly in India also, there is a HIV and AIDS Act which has been passed in 2017-18 which prohibits HIV related stigma and discrimination. So this legislation has come in this country, but I will talk about what is the challenge and what is the way forward on legislation, because just bringing in a legislation is not enough. There are other challenges too. Numerous punitive laws continue to hinder the HIV response in the region. HIV restriction on entry, stay and residence, and law that criminalize HIV transmission and non-disclosure are held by 13 countries in this region, with Malaysia, New Zealand and Papua New Guinea still enforcing HIV restriction laws. So these are some of the primary laws which are, as the United Nations are strongly recommended to be considered to be removed for, providing enabling environment to address the HIV epidemic. But as you can see, still many countries are holding on to those laws, and these are basically posing the challenge. Same-sex activities are criminalized in 10 countries in the region, making it very difficult for many men who have sex with men, people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans, the whole LGBTIQA community, to access the prevention and treatment services. Bangladesh, the Maldives, Papua New Guinea, Sri Lanka, Singapore imposed prison terms of up to 14 years for homosexuality, and in Afghanistan, Brunei and Pakistan, same-sex sexual activity is punishable by death. So you can see as of now also we are in such situation. And again, I would like to mention that one of the countries have recently left that list. I think it was last week when Bhutan has also legalized same-sex relationship. So, but more or less in majority countries, this type of legal barriers still remain. But slowly, countries are opening up. So in 2013, New Zealand became the first country in the region to legalized same-sex marriage. It was followed by Australia in 2017 and Taiwan in 2019. In India also in 2018, homosexuality was decriminalized as a result of the landmark judgment by the Supreme Court of India. And in 2018 and 19, specific laws were passed to protect the right of the transgender communities in Pakistan and India. For example, in India we have the Transgender Person Protection of Rights Act 2019, which has started implementation this year. And in 2017, a new civil code in Vietnam gives transgender people the right to register their change of gender. So as you can see that countries like Vietnam, Pakistan, India, Philippines, they have brought in lot of legislation. But based on my experience and since you guys are learning of these things, one of the key learnings that I take from this legislation is that bringing in legislation is one thing, but it is really a tough task to basically take this legislation to the people for whom they are made and to implement them in the ground. So if you see, not only in health aspect, in other aspect also, that remains a major challenge. And in this aspect also, as community representative, as working in the community, we should always keep a track that just passing the registration is not enough. We have to keep a track that whether it is implemented in the ground and whether the beneficiaries of that legislation are getting the benefit of it or not. So that has to be seen, because that takes time and that is the real challenge. Basically now to summarize and think about what is the way forward in terms of the HIV epidemic as well as the issues around LGBTIQA community. So newer development, as you can see from HIV point of view, now the target is after the COVID pandemic, now the target has been revised to 95 for 2025, and we see that we have reached say 75 to 80% of the population. So reaching that 25 to 30% is the most difficult thing. I mean, you have already reached out to people who are easily reached, isn't it? So that easy part has been over. So now all the countries and all the national programs in the countries, they have to think about newer and innovative strategy to reach out to the unreached population. And reaching this unreached population is the toughest task. And if we want to finish the HIV as a public health problem by 2030, if we want to achieve the fast track target of 2025, then we have to reach out to these unreached communities. And if you talk about LGBTIQ community, because of the legal barriers, because of the social norms, as we have seen, they remain more or less hidden population, and innovative strategies are also key for this population. So what are some of the innovative strategies that has come in recent years? Of course, one is it has been realized that in the HIV epidemic, and in fact HIV program gives us messages to all the other public health program, and it has been highlighted again and again in the COVID-19 pandemic also, is that in HIV program the communities who are affected, they play a key role, and that is unique. It has been unique to the HIV program. So with that thing in mind, it has been realized that the delivery of the services, especially to reach the unreached population, it has to be taken to the community. So with that in mind, one of the successful intervention that has been recently, in last few years ongoing, is the community-based testing. That instead of testing for HIV in healthcare facilities with proper laboratory facilities, now newer smart testing kits have come, where specific with just a prick of finger, one drop of blood can give you a HIV test result. So that test can be done by a paramedical staff in the community setup. So those type of testing has been done and scaled up in many countries. In fact, 15 countries are currently piloting or implementing it in the Asia Pacific region, and that is giving good results in terms of increased testing of coverage and in terms of testing newer people from the key population. The second and the most interesting thing that is coming up, and that is very relevant to the friends in the LGBT community, is self-testing, because they are not because the stigma and discrimination and the different barriers, they are not many of them are not comfortable visiting the healthcare facilities or the underlying facilities. So there for them, this intervention of self-testing with online support on counseling is piloted in different countries, and it has received very positive and good response from the key population, particularly the MSM population, the TG population, etc. And approximately 1/3 of MSM in China were tested to be using HIV self-testing kit, with many of these self-testing representing the first time the man ever tested in 2017. So you can see that for reaching that 25 to 30%, this type of innovation is paying result. That means people who are not willing to come out and test in health facilities, they are taking this type of innovations where they can, without revealing their identity or without going to a healthcare facility, they can get themselves tested, and then they can continue getting treatment from the private facility. So those type of things are being piloted. Another important intervention that has come in recent years is the pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is basically provision of ART medicines before as a preventive measure. As of now, mostly we give ART when someone is positive, and they are put on ART for lifelong. But especially for the very high risk group population who as a profession, like a sex worker or injecting drug users, they are involved in high risk behavior. For them, in different countries, in different settings, this is known as PERP or pre-exposure prophylactic is being piloted, and a growing number of people, especially from the MSM and transgender community, are buying PrEP medicines online, suggesting a growing demand for this intervention. So it is being piloted in all the major countries in the region, and is also planned to be rolled out as part of the national program. Also, during the COVID-19 pandemic, it is seen that instead of calling the PLHIV or the injecting drug users for their medicine to the ART center or the OST center on a monthly basis, something called multi-month dispensation of drugs, ART and OST, because of the lockdown and all, it was piloted during the COVID-19 pandemic. But that gave very good result on the retention of ART, because people were happy to take the multi-month drugs at a go, and it was seen that with a continuous follow-up by the peer educators and all outreach workers, they have been able to sustain their intake of medicine, and it was also very successful and well received by the community. So these are some of the new developments in the program that is happening, which is basically aimed to reaching the unreached population in order to end HIV/AIDS by 2030. Also, as I mentioned, in the legal environment, especially for the LGBTI community, also for the injecting drug users and for the sex workers, legal interventions are being taken up. For example, for injecting drug users, a lot of countries are now doing HIV prevention services and needle syringe exchange program in prison settings. Similarly, for sex worker, social protection schemes specific for the sex workers are being rolled out in many of the countries, especially in view of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I have talked about the legal provisioning that is happening for the LGBTI population. So, programmatic, the prevention and treatment measures, along with this legal intervention, I hope these will all work together in helping us to first to move to our 2025 FASTag target, and ultimately to the 2030 goal of ending AIDS as a public health program as part of the Sustainable Development Goal. Thank you. So with that, I close my presentation, and I'm happy to take your questions and also hear your experiences. Kevin, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for taking your time from your busy schedule to talk to us. It was definitely an informative session. I'm sure that we all learned at something and unlearned at least some misconceptions. By the end of this talk, I'm sure that there are a lot of questions that are there in everyone's minds. So, without any further delay, we shall now move on to the question answer session. If you have a question, raise your hands on Zoom Cloud meetings. Please raise your hand, and a participant will be chosen by the moderator at random from whoever has raised their hands to ask a question to the speaker. You will be allowed to unmute your microphone by the moderator only during this time to facilitate better discussion. Introduce yourself first before asking your question. In case of technical issues, send in your question via chat box. Those who wish to ask questions, please raise your hand. Are there any questions?
I think there is a question in the chat box by Emily. Maybe she would like to ask the question directly also.
Yes. Sir, I got a message from Emily saying she has a technical issue. Her mic is not working. Sir, I'll read out the question for the benefit of all. The question is: in countries like India, where even mentioning sex and LGBTQIA plus in a conversation is a taboo in our society, how do you think we as students can do our bit to demystify AIDS, especially when it comes to LGBTQIA plus?
Thank you, Emily, for your question. So, basically, as you can see that now, as part of our daily life discourse, whether in the television or in our schools or colleges, we are talking about HIV. We are talking about safe sex, and we are talking about use of condom, and we are also talking about these LGBTI community issues, etc. So ultimately, I won't say that people are not talking in India. I have been interacting with different stakeholders, including schools and colleges. So compared to past, now people are talking, and it is upon all of us. People like us who work in the program, people like you who are growing up are part of the community, are part of the youth group who has a strong voice. So basically, you should first clarify your concepts about these communities and what are their specific issues, and only when each of us, including you, the youth, when we start speaking about those issues, then only these issues will be demystified. So as I spoke today, in India, a lot of positive things has happened. For example, this same-sex, the Section 3 has been passed by the Supreme Court of India, and the Transgender Person Protection of Rights Act has come. So it is not that the legal environment remains the same in India. Obviously, as different stakeholders, we have to start speaking about it, and only when we speak about it freely, the issues can be addressed.
Thank you, sir. There is a question that has been raised through the chat boxes to the moderator. The question is from Omar Safwa. His question is: I believe that inclusion is very important while working with a community or a group, and this does not just extend to them participating in the process, but also in taking up roles of importance. What are your views on this, and has the United Nations ensured this in their work with the LGBTQIA plus community? So, what are your take on it?
So thank you very much. This is quite a pertinent question that has been addressed, in fact, as we speak, because as I mentioned in the beginning, the HIV epidemic is now 40 years old, and we have long back identified these communities who are most affected by the HIV epidemic. So I'm happy to tell you that as part of the UN system, we have people from the PLHIV community working as part of the UN system. Also, we and the LGBT community, LGBTQI community also working as part of the UN system in different levels. Also, if I talk about India, in India we have different community-based organizations run by this particular group of population who work very closely with the UN system. For example, suppose we have to do some intervention among some transgender communities. So there are very strong organizations led by these communities in the country who basically work with the UN system to work for the community. So basically, it's already been done in the country, and as a UN system, we strongly advocate for that at all times.
Thank you, sir. Next question is by Adam Peterson. His question is, what are the effective mechanisms for helping the LGBTQIA plus HIV/AIDS patients in countries where homosexuality is still criminalized?
Okay. That's a very good question. So basically, as a that can vary from context to context. So and he is talking about the MSM population or the transgender population or the LGBTI community as a whole.
So both MSM and
Okay. Okay. So as UN, basically we wherever this type of laws continues to exist, we promote or advocate with the government to initiate legal processes where this type of laws can be removed, and this takes time. For example, in India also, it was a long process which was led by the civil society and the community members, and it was basically supported by the UN system. So similarly, that is one area to remove the legal barrier we work for the provision of the HIV/AIDS services for this community in all the countries across the globe, and specific. If we are talking of the Asia Pacific region, the model of HIV program has been working through the community, and I have talked about it in my last slide also. So for these, wherever even the laws are there in some country prohibiting homosexuality, in those countries also the UN system and other international organizations, they work in close coordination with community-based organizations run by these community groups. For example, gay population group or transgender community group. So the interventions for HIV prevention and treatment are implemented through them, so that the people who are infected or affected, they have the comfort without stigma and discrimination accessing the prevention and treatment services. So that's a common model we follow across the world. So basically, my answer to will be, on one hand, as UN system, we advocate for removal of such punitive and discriminatory laws. On the other hand, working with the community, we try to provide the prevention and treatment services to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next question is raised by Minakshi. Minakshi, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you, Captain. First of all, thank you so much, sir, for being part of our session today. I would like to ask you two questions. The first question is with respect to the impact of sex work on the spread of HIV/AIDS. So today in India especially, there's been a lot of talk about legalizing sex work. So I want to know, how is it that, will this pose as a hindrance to the eradication of HIV/AIDS? And second question is with respect to the existence of sex education in schools. Currently in India, we do not have sex education in schools, and talk about the use of contraceptives in school is essentially considered to be taboo. So I would like to know the importance of the same and your take on the matter. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. So basically, to start with your first question, let me come to the second question first. So basically, if you talk about sex education among the UN system, we have organizations like UNESCO and UNFPA. UNESCO work on the education sector, and UNFPA work on the sexual and reproductive health area. So they have been working closely with the different ministries and departments at national and state level to bring in this, whatever you are seeing, the messages on sex and reproductive health, including HIV, etc., to the at least to the high school students. So as I just mentioned in the previous question, that level of advocacy is happening, and as part of the school health program, you must be aware that recently school health program has been launched. It's joint collaboration between the Health Ministry and the Education Ministry, Human Resource Development or Education Ministry. So this joint school health program will have component of what you were saying, sexual and reproductive health, and it is being addressed. Part 2, in fact, your first question was related to legalization of sex work, and if it is not done, whether it will affect the ending of HIV epidemic in India. So, as you might have seen in my presentation, India is one of the countries where the HIV prevention services among the sex workers has been quite successful, and it has led to the reduction of the new infection among the sex workers across the Asia Pacific region or globally. So that has been possible because although sex work is not legalized in India, there are many places, especially where there is high concentration of sex worker belonging to the lower socio-economic status. For example, places like Mumbai, places like Chennai, places like Sonagachi in Kolkata, or that type of places has been covered in a saturated manner by the HIV program for many years, and that has given results. Our issue is regarding only that population which I was talking about, that 25 to 30% population. That includes a different typology of sex worker. For example, sex worker belonging to the higher socio-economic status or following different methodology. For example, this conventional sex worker who are provided services as part of the program are those who are operating from brothels, or sex worker who operates from front of the cinema hall, belonging to lower socio-economic status. But there are others who operate from mobile phone and internet. So as I mentioned, as the newer strategy of the program has been such that they are trying to reach out to that type of population using technology. And I personally feel that even though in India, even if we are not able to decriminalize sex work, we should be able to control the HIV epidemic as per our target if we are able to use some innovative and technology driven intervention among this remaining group of population. And to be specific to your question of decriminalization of sex work, I don't see that coming in recent years.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Sir, can we take one last question? It's
Sure.
almost time. Sure. So this question is by Naina. The question is, what is the importance of inclusion of social work and mental health professionals in fighting against the disease and assisting LGBTQIA plus people who are diagnosed with HIV/AIDS?
So that's a very pertinent and a futuristic question, which in fact was again very well appreciated, and importance of it was reinforced during this COVID-19 pandemic, when these communities, for example, transgender and sex workers, they had suddenly they have no source of income, and their livelihood was taken away. So they had a very tough time. And again, people who had they have a certain way of meeting, they are confined to their home and they are not able to meet. So this LGBTQ community, who are anyway challenged because of this stigma, discrimination and different societal norms, they had to undergo a lot of stress and anxiety during the pandemic, and it reinforced the fact to have a structured mental health and psychosocial support system for the community. So in fact, Government of India has also taken note of that, and they are also, although counseling services for specific to HIV is part of the HIV program for many years now, but now they are working on integrating mental health services and psychosocial support services as part of the HIV program for this key population, including the LGBTIQ population. And we are happy that as UN agency, we are also supporting the government in this endeavor. So that is coming up shortly.
Thank you, sir. With this, we now come to the end of the enlightening session. Thank you so much, sir, for such an enlightening talk. And I'm indeed sure that we all learned and unlearned a lot of things tonight. On behalf of the entire Nauticons team and the participants, I take this opportunity to express our sincere gratitude to you, sir. Also, thanking the entire participants who joined with us tonight to listen and learn from you, sir. With this, I give on to the stage to Meenakshi for the word of thanks. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kiran.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Dr. Chiranjeevi sir, for this very informative session. Your words have indeed been of value and broadened our views on this topic. I would also like to extend a huge thanks to the participants for taking time and participating in this session, and also being very active in voicing your opinions. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all the members of Nauticum's event management, especially the social media team and the organizational team, without which this event would not have been possible. Once again, I extend a huge thank you to all for your attendance. Unfortunately, this session will be the last session for this year, and I thank everybody who've been with us since our first session. Please stay updated. Please subscribe to our Instagram page for further updates regarding future sessions, and we look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you so much and have a great evening.